All right. Episode 2. Hey, let's not overdo it. All right. Let's keep this stream mediocre at best. At best. All right.
Like my man Crabtree.
That's what I'm talking about. All right. So it's week 2. I'm Michael. Across from me virtually is my partner in crime, Joe. Joe, how you doing, man?
Doing great. Ready to roll.
Perfect. All right, so last week we talked about a bunch of things that had to do with pre-draft and what you're trying to do to get everything squared away before you actually go into your draft, massaging those tier lists, deep tissue massage for the tier list. Got to massage them every day, guys. It's real important. But once you're done massaging your tier lists, which is never, because you're always massaging your tier lists, but once you have them squared away and ready to go, some of the things that we talked about were draft slots that you want to be in, how to make your tier lists, how to make some of your picks as you're going through the draft. And one of the things that we lightly touched on, but we didn't get to fully go over, we're going to pick back up with right now, is roster compositions and how you want your overall roster to look by the time that your draft is done, and how you find a way to make that, right? How you find a way to build that throughout your draft. So one of the biggest things that we wanted to talk about today is we talked a bit about consistency last week, and Joe and I are huge on consistency. When you're building your roster, you have to make sure that you don't build them in such a way that you're setting yourself up for failure, right, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me a couple of ways that you can set yourself up for failure that you want to try and avoid.
Yeah, some of the obvious things that you can set yourself up for failure with is if you're drafting a lot of injured players or players who are suspended or likely to be suspended. That's putting you in a position where you're going to have a lot of people, like even before the bye weeks, you're going to have a lot of people who are going to have to be on your bench that you drafted that you want to play. And so then when you have this kind of players, and then you get into the bye week part of the season, you're going to have to start cutting players that are actually in your top 10 or 12 players that you don't want to cut, because you're not going to even be able to fill the roster because you got people suspended, maybe Zeke suspended, maybe Gronk's injured, So so if you're picking one or two of these people that are risky in some way, risk to not play, especially, then you don't want to get too many of those guys. You don't want to build your team around.
Right, exactly. I think you said something that was really prudent last week that I'm going to highlight again. There are more weeks that at least one team has a bye week than there are not weeks of the fantasy season, at least, right? So the bulk of where you need to win your games and where you're trying to make your playoff push, you are going to have someone on bye. It's very likely. You may have a couple of weeks where you don't have somebody on bye or somebody unimportant is on bye, but there's a lot of weeks where you have someone on bye, and if you have a bunch of guys with red next to their name, right, whether it be out, doubtful, suspended, there's a bunch of suspensions this year. There've even been more in the past. You have to really be careful building a team around those guys and making them the core value of what your team, the strength of your team, right? And picking them in early rounds especially, right? You don't want to lose in the early rounds. You have to be careful picking those guys and making a full roster squad of them. So, Joe, in your eyes, as a matter of fact, we're in the middle of a slow draft right now where you've executed this, I think, pretty well. I got to say, I think you've executed it pretty well. I've seen some poor executions of it. I think you did pretty well. Tell me how many lottery tickets, if you will, in one way or another that you're willing to take. And maybe let's talk about the different types of lottery tickets that there are versus consistent people.
Yeah, so there's definitely a few different types of lottery tickets, and when you take the kind that you take and when you take them in your draft determines how many you should take. So, for example, I personally like to, in the first 2 rounds, I like to go as safe as possible. But if you do take a risky player, in this case, a risky player might be Zeke because you think he's probably going to be suspended 6 games. We don't really know.
It'll be 4.
And he's not risky because it won't be more. He's not risky because he might play bad. He's almost certainly going to play well, and he doesn't have any real injury history that we know of. But he's risky because the first 6 weeks he's not going to be there, and so if anybody else on your team gets hurt, now you're in a hole.
Right.
Because you spent a high pick on Zeke, you spent a high pick on somebody else, and that person gets hurt, now you're in a hole for the first 6 weeks at least. But Zeke is kind of unique, or the people who are suspended are somewhat unique
Yes, they are.
As far as their risk, because you know when they're coming back. And so if they're not additionally an injury risk into being suspended, which I don't think any of the people who were suspended this year are especially high injury risks, then that's to me that's a much lower risk level, because I can plan my draft and my waivers and everything else around, okay, this guy's coming back this day, and then I can go from there.
Typically, if they're a running back too, you can also plan to handcuff that guy, a little bit earlier than you would. And especially, let's take Zeke in a case like this. Darren McFadden is the week 1 to 7 hero, dude. He is the pre-week 7 hero until he gets hurt. So you can use that guy. Just make sure that you headhunt him a little bit early, and you get 80% of the value of Zeke. Maybe let's call it 3/4 of the value of Zeke. This applies to somebody like Le'Veon Bell in the past as well. It wasn't D'Angelo Williams. It was the Steelers' run game, right? Take the backup guy. You get 75% of that guy or more, even better, right? For the first however many weeks of the season. So backup running back is especially important in how you can try and make your roster composition work as well.
That's right, and that kind of handcuff is again different from the kind of handcuff, and better in a lot of ways than the kind of handcuff that you do with a back who's potentially going to get hurt or potentially likely to get hurt, because you know that you're going to play those handcuffs, so you're going to get some value out of them if the guy's suspended. So like if I pick Darren McFadden, I'm going to get, until he gets hurt, I'm going to get 4 or 5 or 6 games of value out of him, which is something. Whereas if I handcuff, say, Le'Veon Bell, I might not get anything out of that guy this season.
Right.
Probably I'll get a game or 2, but I might not get anything out of that guy. I know I'm getting 6 games out of McFadden or 3 games out of Jacquizz Rodgers, depending on which player. And so those handcuffs are easier to pick early because you know you're getting something from them. And also they're easy to pick early because you know when to let them go.
Right. That's like, exactly right. The knowledge is just knowing is half of it.
Once Zeke is back, see you later, Darren McFadden.
Peace out, dude. Yeah.
Right. So those guys are, in my opinion, a much lower risk than the injury prone guys. And injury prone guys, we're talking
these
Gronk.
Are the other type of lottery tickets, right?
The other type of lottery ticket. You're typing Gronk, and Gronk is the biggest one, but Le'Veon Bell is also kind of injury prone.
Jordan Reed.
Sammy Watkins is very injury prone.
Jordan Reed is another one.
Jordan Reed's very injury. A lot of these tight ends,
right.
Jordan Reed especially. And these are the kind of guys, Gronk especially, but Jordan Reed as well, they can win you if they are healthy the second half of the season, basically, or around playoff time, plus enough to get you into the playoffs. They can win you your league.
Right.
Like if you were guaranteed that Gronk would play the last 10 games of the season this year, he'd be a first round pick in every league.
Right.
Right. I mean, he's a guy that can win you your league, and he's going in the third, like late second, early third rounds in a lot of leagues, and that's because there's a huge injury risk with him. You are far from guaranteed that he will play the last 10 weeks. You're pretty much guaranteed he won't play all of the last 10 weeks. Right. But he might. You hope if you're picking him, you're hoping that he's going to play the ones that you need him to.
Right.
So that's a different kind of lottery pick, and there's a place for those guys too, because if you hit on it, you can win your league.
That's exactly.
And it's not often that a third round pick is just going to say like, all right, I'm just going to win your league if I'm healthy.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that we call them lottery tickets. I don't know, whatever other people want to call them, risky picks, whatever. We call them lottery tickets for a reason, because you punch the lotto, and when you hit, you really hit. You win. You just win. And I think that you executed it pretty beautifully. The way that the draft kind of shaped up dictated that you were able to do this. And you grabbed Ezekiel Elliott in the second round after you had already made a safe pick in Mike Evans in the first round. And then you were able to grab Gronk in the third round, and then you were able to come back in the fourth round and make a safe pick again, right? So you've bookended your lottery tickets, which are knowledge, which are actually, it's funny, they're both of the types of lottery tickets too. You have one suspended guy, you have one hurt guy. You know where the suspended guy, you know what's up with him, and the only thing, it could only get better from here, right? It can't get worse, it can only get better. So you drafted him with the knowledge that it's 6 games or less, and then you know who the backup to that guy is. And then Gronk is one of those where he could start the season hot and win you the first 4 games. He could make you a playoff push with the last 10 games and win you the season. So I think you executed it pretty beautifully. It allowed you to do it, and it was there. But we also want to go to the other side and talk about, the consistent players. But before we do that, how many of these guys are you willing to pick? And I know you were talking about how where you pick them and how many you pick makes a bit of a difference. So I'll tell you this, I'm only willing to pick maybe 2 or 3 of those guys at most, especially if they're early, right? Like what you've done, you've taken 2 guys early. I think you got to be done unless it's a very, very late guy at the end of the draft, right?
Yeah, and absolutely. And not only that, but I would not have picked 2 Gronk type risks in the first 4 rounds.
Yeah, right. The injury risk is worse.
It's much worse, in my opinion. And the knowledge that Zeke provides, that I know that at most 6 weeks he'll be back, allows me to kind of base the rest of my draft around that. So I know, like, for example, like the rookie running backs especially, it takes them a little time to establish themselves usually. Like week 1, week 2, they usually struggle. Then they get hot in the second half of the season.
Right.
I got to kind of avoid those guys.
Yeah, that's
because I know I'm already out a great running back for the first 6 weeks.
That's a great point.
So I if anything, like I'm looking at, like, you know, for me, Jeremy Hill might make more sense than Joe Mixon if you had Zeke. Even though I think Mixon will have a better season, I need to survive those first 6 weeks.
Right.
And,
exactly.
and Mixon might not do it.
We'll take Jeremy Hill in round 12 or old man Frank Gore in round 8 rather than having to take Joe Mixon in round 4, right? Because the cost value, you need to offset the safety that you now need. You have to offset in some way in those the meat of the rounds. You know, let's call it 4 to 7, 4 to 8, somewhere right around there. And you can take a guy that's much more valuable, but you know will start the season and not die before week 4, you know, or hopefully, and you know he won't start slow. It's very likely that he won't start slow. So that's a great point that you bring up, especially with rookies. They typically start slow, but they may be talented and have a stellar season. So
yeah, and so as far as the number goes, like you said, basically once you get 2 risky guys early, you're pretty much done until the later rounds as far as risk. At least I think you should be done pretty much as far as risk goes. Otherwise, you risk losing your season by like 3rd or 4th week if 2 or 3 of those guys go down.
Yeah, what do we say about the first 2 rounds? You just don't lose.
Don't lose. Give yourself a chance.
Yeah,
let yourself be playing for the playoffs in week 11 and 12, and then you can say you gave yourself a chance.
Right. So if you pick 6, 7 safe picks in a row, let's call it maybe even 6 to 8 safe picks in a row, how many guys are you willing to gamble on later on in the draft? Let's call it 50-50 between suspended guys and injured guys. How many guys are you willing to take lottery tickets later on in the draft after that?
Well, I mean, any pick after like the 13th round, there's no such thing as a bad pick.
Right.
Like, but more than likely, those guys aren't going to be on your team at the end of the season anyway. Mm-hmm. So I'm willing to gamble with those picks.
Right.
But basically, as long as there are safe people on the board, and by safe I mean they're going to get volume, they're not terribly injury prone.
Oh, wait until we talk about volume. Just wait.
So they're going to be consistent week to week, and not only that, but they're going to be they're not terribly injury prone. Then I take those guys as long as they're there. But once they're not there anymore, like, I'm not crazy about like a slot guy is going to get 700 yards or something. Maybe I'll take the higher upside in round 13, 14, 15, see if I can get a chance. And if I end up cutting that guy, it's not really a big deal. There's going to be people in the waiver wire. Right. So those guys in rounds 12, 13, 14, 15, they're pretty much replacement level. They're like waiver wire level, more or less. You can get some decent players in 12 maybe. But 13, 14, 15 especially, if you want to take a risk on a guy that you think for whatever reason is going to have a good year, there's nothing wrong with that.
Good deal. I love it. Okay, so conversely, talking about guys that are lottery tickets, building a team that is pretty safe usually revolves around consistency in some form or fashion. Right. Now, there's also 2 types of consistency type of players as well. There's also the week-to-week lottery tickets, if you will, which we can talk about on the other side of the consistency here. But typically, the guys that are going to be the most consistent for you are the guys that get volume, right? And volume wins fantasy. That's just the way that it is. In that very same draft that you executed the lottery tickets beautifully, I am literally just gonna volume people to death. I really am. I'm going to change my team name to pump up the volume. Volume 2. That's what I'm doing. So it's one of those things where unless my entire squad gets hurt, there is no way that my people are not going to have 20 carries and 10 targets a game, right? And I'm just gonna point per reception and point per carry people to death. Right, so this is the other way to do it. I've gone the ultra safe draft route this time around, and picking safe players that usually have that volume. We're talking about like Hugh Jackson and Kubiak are great examples of people who love to run the ball a lot.
In general, people who aren't in running backs by committee, even if they're not part of a great offense, even if their team doesn't run the ball like a super ton, if they're a guy who's not in a running back by committee, they're going to get enough volume to be consistent.
Right. That's exactly right. That's a great point. That's a better way to say it. And those are being hard to come by, but the people who get volume can really, really win you fantasy and provide a great floor for you in a consistent manner. And on the other side of that, we were talking about guys who are sort of lottery tickets, but they're week-to-week lottery tickets, right? So this is where you have to know yourself. And you have to decide whether you're able to play these guys or not, because we always talk about people like Deshaun Jackson, the Marquise Goodwins later on down the draft, that kind of guy, the go long and toss it kind of guys, or the running backs in the committee that can pop off when the team is losing and they can pop off for like 14 catches in one game or some shit like that. Matt Asiata did it a couple of years ago. He was that kind of guy. Bilal Powell following up Matt Forte was that kind of guy. Anytime they were down in a game, they would just pop off for like 30 points, right? When you grab those kind of guys, you have to know that they are going to be really big roller coaster rides, right? At the end of the season, they may have 14 points a game, but it's 31 week and like 4 the other, right? So you have to be really, really careful with those kind of guys. Are you willing to pick those on your roster at all, Joe?
I am, but I want it to be someone who's going to be, inconsistent but predictable. Mm-hmm. So what I don't want necessarily is a guy who's like reliant on a single long ball for the touchdown. I'm much more willing to take one of these like dump off running back types where it's like, okay, the Jets are playing the Patriots this week. They're going to get blown out. I'm picking the dump off running back guy this week. So I want there to be some predictability. At the same time, if the price is right, it's not bad to have one of these guys on your team. That way, if you're facing like a ton of bye weeks and you're playing a bunch of scrubs or something like that, you can just throw that guy out there and say, well, I'm probably going to lose anyway. Hope he gets a 70-yard touchdown.
Right. The other thing that you can do with this guy that's pretty important, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about a little bit further into the season and we talk about week to week and matchups and things like that. If you know that you're going to, or it's pretty likely that you're going to lose a game, that guy could win you the week. Right? These guys absolutely are the explosive, high upside guys that could really, the Mike Wallaces of the world, the Deshaun Jacksons of the world, they can literally just carry you and get 40 points because they got 2 long breakaway touchdowns, right? So
any given week, they could be the number 1 receiver in fantasy.
That's exactly right. These are the guys that win you the $1 million in DFS some weeks because they were $5,400 and they got you 40 points, right? So it's not terrible to have these guys on your roster, but you have to know yourself, and you can't be a tinkerer with those kind of guys, right? If you tinker with your roster, you're going to want to put that guy in, then you're not going to want to put that guy in, then you're going to want to play him. You're always going to lose with that guy, right? Only play him when you need to, or if you're willing to ride him out every single week. So be careful with those guys. I agree with you. I'm more willing to play the or to pick the guy who's got some predictability to his inconsistency, and that way I'll try and take that guy at a valuable spot in the draft, and maybe at a position that I'm already hurting at, or a position that I'm hurting at. It could really fill the void, and I'm willing to ride that guy out. You know what I'm saying? Another thing that is really, really important, we were talking about this before the broadcast started, because I think we both really feel strongly about this. If you're not willing to ride a guy out for at least 4 or 5 weeks, I'd say at the minimum, right? At the minimum, if you're not willing to ride out a quarter of the season with the guy, don't draft him. Don't draft him. Save yourself the headache. Get somebody who is better that you won't be able to trade for at this point. Nobody wants to trade for inconsistent guys because they don't know when they're going to get from them and all that. So if you're gonna pick somebody, roll with them. Do not drop them. Do not tinker with your lineup. Make the decision and be willing to roll out with that guy for at least 5 weeks before you make any decisions.
Any trade that you do in the first 5 weeks regarding somebody who's like underperforming like this, that you didn't feel enough conviction on when you drafted him, and so you had a bad first 3 weeks, and you're gonna try to trade him. You're gonna get 3 or 4 or 5 round discount on that guy.
Yeah.
So you drafted him in the 4th round, you're gonna get an 8th round pick for him.
Right.
Don't do that. Don't put yourself in that situation.
Just draft the 8th round guy in the 4th round if you're going to do that, right? Just draft the consistent guy, literally, or draft somebody that's a little bit more consistent, and then in the 5th round get the other guy that you were going to take instead of it. So just don't do that to yourself. Like it's a miserable way to live fantasy. It just sucks, right? So be careful of doing that. So now that we've talked about roster compositions and how to really try and fill them out. I think the last part that we want to wrap up on this, and then we'll move into top players and how we break some tiebreakers. Before you start on your draft, you may want to sit down and have an idea of what you want your roster to look like, right? The actual composition that your roster is going to make, how you're going to build that, and that should lend you some credence to how you're going to attack the draft and what picks you're going to make, and the idea of how you're going to build this roster. So when you're doing that, you want to make sure that you don't have an unrealistic idea of what your roster should look like, and you want to make sure that you don't undersell what your roster should look like either, right? You don't want to go either way with it. So you also need to learn how to be ready to jump ship when your roster composition isn't shaping out like you wanted it to be either, right? So, you know, what do you do for this, Joe? How do you look at your roster and say, this is kind of what I want it to look like? What are a couple of things that give you a look into what you think you're wanting the roster to look like for a particular season?
So the first thing I do is look at the rules of the league I'm playing in, because certain leagues like give quarterbacks more points or give them less points or penalize them more for interceptions or in turnovers or give them more points for touchdowns or whatever. Quarterbacks is the one where this varies the most, but there are other positions where it varies too, and that can really make a difference as far as what I want my roster to look like. So that's one. Whereas in leagues where quarterbacks are rewarded more for touchdowns or penalized more for interceptions, maybe I'm going to think about getting a quarterback higher there. In other words, maybe I want one of the top 5 quarterbacks or guys that I peg as a guaranteed top 5 quarterback. Whereas in other leagues, in more standard leagues or standard PPR leagues, maybe I care a little bit less about having one of the top quarterbacks. The other thing that I like to do is have a little bit of depth as far as like the one of the running back or receiver positions. The way that I tend to like to do it is stack up one of them so that I get like 4 guys who are super good at either running back or receiver. And I can like rely on those guys. I don't need to play the waiver wire game. I don't need to spend any of my waiver picks or my waiver budget on those guys. I don't need to spend any of my late round flyers on players from that position. Right. I can just focus on the other one. So maybe if I get, it depends on how the early rounds of the draft go, but maybe I get 4 running backs in the first 6 rounds. Then the rest of the time I'm just picking receivers. So my roster will end up with only 4 running backs and then 6 or 7 receivers. And those guys, the receivers, will be a little bit more of the wild types, the unpredictable types, perhaps. And not week to week, but maybe season-long ones. Because all you need to do is hit on one of those 6 or 7 that I picked, and then all of a sudden I've got 3 great running backs and 1 receiver. I'm looking good.
Yeah, I think what you were saying with how you pick the running backs versus the receivers or vice versa is a really good way. We were talking about this before. You should always be picking quality or depth, right? So if you pick a bunch of guys that are quality, then you need to load up in depth at your other position, right? You shouldn't be you shouldn't be looking at it because like the quality does make a difference, right? You don't need 7 of each if you have one that's significantly higher quality than the other. Okay, so once you pick those 4 running backs, your 5th guy's never going to see the light of day unless 2 guys at least get hurt. And while running backs get hurt, it's not like they don't get hurt. Like all of them aren't going to get hurt, right? There's some guys that get hurt, and it's not common that they play all 16 games, but it's very common that the healthy guys play 14 or 15, and you just want to make sure that you're not overdoing it where you could be stacking up where you really do need the depth to maybe play matchups or something like that, or for bye weeks and stuff like that. So you do need to be careful of that. So I think that's a good point that you brought up in how to try and pick that as well. So once you
there's one other thing as far as this goes that I think is really important. And we talked about this a little bit last week, but you have to know yourself when you're doing this, what you want your team to look like. So some people are fine with playing the matchups, especially with quarterbacks and tight ends. Right? They're going to do the research. They're going to say, okay, like I'm going to play the waiver wire streaming quarterback route. I'm just going to pick whoever's playing against the Saints, right? Or I'm going to pick whoever's playing against the Colts because these guys just don't play defense.
Right, they don't play any defense.
So, but some other people aren't comfortable with that, or they're going to doubt themselves. They're going to tinker too much, and so those people need to think more about. Maybe it's worth investing in a really good quarterback. And I know that you read all this stuff and people say it's not worth it. Like pick quarterbacks late. If you're the kind of person who's going to play the wrong quarterback every week, it is worth it.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to lose.
Right. If you're going to turn QBs 4 and 5 into QB 19, you need to know yourself, right, and how you're going to play this. I think that's another really great point. If you are going to play the matchup game as well, make sure you pick positions that are a bit more predictable too, right? Like that also gives you a better opportunity to try and win week in and week out when you're trying to play the iffy game too. So, all right. So once you're done setting up your roster composition, you're done doing your tier lists and stuff like that. You've massaged those tier lists nice deep into the tissue. They're feeling good. You're doing great on your massaging. After that, you're gonna. How you order your tier list can make a big difference in how you draft too, right? So sometimes some people like to do a top 50, 100, 150 players, something like that, something along those lines. But inevitably, we know that fantasy is a game where a lot of times it comes down to, I just can't decide between these two guys, right? So sometimes it just comes down to that because nobody does their predictions to where that guy's going to get 1,137 yards, this guy's going to get 1,134 yards, and they're going to get the exact same amount of touchdowns, and one guy's going to get one catch better. How do I do that? You'll stop. You're going to explode your mind. Quit that. We're mediocre at best around here, all right? Keep it simple. And I think that the best way to do it is to employ some method of tiebreakers to where if you're on draft day and you're between two players, how do I split this tie between these two people? Joe, what's our number one tiebreaker, dude? What's the number one tiebreaker?
Best offense.
Right.
Pick the best offense. It's going to score touchdowns, right? Touchdowns win you fantasy games.
That's exactly right.
Right, like
volume and points win you fantasy games. Like that's just how it goes, right?
Volume and touchdowns, right? Like, and if your player plays for the Texans last year with Brock, they didn't score any touchdowns. Right. I mean, it's like fantasy is a week-to-week game, and you win weeks when your team scores touchdowns, and you lose weeks when your team doesn't score touchdowns. Like, volume matters a lot. Like, volume's the other thing that matters a lot. Like, yards matter, all that stuff matters, but if you don't score any touchdowns, you're not winning that week. Right. Almost never.
That's exactly right. So, on the train of tiebreakers, right after that, the very next thing to tie break is if you decide they have equivalent offenses. Their offenses are exactly the same. They're so close. I still can't make a decision. I'm picking the worst defense, right? Whichever team has the lesser defense, the less capable defense, I'm picking those guys because they're going to be put on the field more, in a position that they need to score points, right? We used the example earlier with like Bilal Powell and stuff like that when the Jets were behind. He's a perfect example. People that are behind and they need to score points, maybe not for like a bell cow back who's a first and second down guy. That's also something that you need to be aware of. Is that guy on that team, right? But it's a tiebreaker for most players, and usually the worst defense lends credence to telling you this is a better guy to pick because he's going to need to score more fantasy points. Their team's going to be on the field more, right? So right after that, what's the next tiebreaker? We're giving you all kinds of tiebreakers here, dude. There's no way you can end in a tie after you employ the Fantasy Elite proven trademark tiebreaker methodology, dude. So what's the next one?
Well, if they have the same offense and the same system that fits that player, and they have equally bad defenses, so maybe we're talking about the Saints and the Colts.
Right.
Maybe we're talking about the Raiders if Khalil Mack gets hurt. Right. Then your next tiebreaker is, do they play in the AFC West?
Yep.
Or right, because if they're playing in the AFC West, that's like 4 to 6 games a season where you just can't play them.
Right.
And if you have a receiver and they're playing against the Broncos, when you're going to sit that guy almost, unless he's a top first-round pick, you're sitting that guy.
Yep.
Defense is and if they are a first-round pick, you're probably losing that week because defense is just too good. And pretty much the same with the Chiefs. The defense is just too good.
Right. Yeah, I think as much as we make fun of it, and you and I use the AFC West every single time, right? We use the AFC West because they're, in my mind, undoubtedly the best 4 defensive teams in the league. They have to be, right? This was the just so everybody knows, a couple of years ago, this was the NFC West, right? This is how they were. The 49ers, the Rams, the Cardinals, and the Seahawks just were stupid every single season, and they just beat the crap out of each other in 9 to 7 games every single week. It was miserable, right? Awesome football to watch, but for fantasy, just a miserable slugfest.
The
right?
3-6 classic between the Seahawks and the Cardinals.
Yeah, exactly. where by far the most points scored were by kickers, like without a doubt. It's no fantasy player was outscoring the kickers, right? So we use the AFC West as a funny example, but the point here is to know what division they play in, know a little bit about their schedule, read up on the team, figure out which team they play for, and decide what kind of opponents they have. And usually their division gives you the best idea because they play 6 games against those guys, right? You know, the Patriots are just going to steamroll their division, right? So, I mean, it's true, right? They're just going to steamroll their division. Everyone in their division just sucks. So they're going to steamroll their division. So you need to understand that the guys that close out those games are really important, right? The guy who they're going to put in to close out 14 minutes of the fourth quarter is probably a guy that you want on your team, right? So
you're not going to be chucking the ball deep in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, their receivers have limited value for like fourth quarter of 6 games of the season, right? So be careful when you take those guys on your team. So that's pretty important too. So you need to make sure that you have some sort of tiebreaker method in place. These are the things that we recommend. It's patented, always works, guaranteed. Money back guarantee on that one, dude. 100%.
Now, what's one of the things that we didn't recommend that a lot of people will use as a tiebreaker, even more important than a tiebreaker?
Oh, the player that I like, the player that I want to cheer for, that guy, the player that plays for my team.
Player that plays for your team. Don't pick that guy.
Yeah, that is, dude. Please don't do that. If you're serious about, look, if you just want to cheer for your team and you don't care about donating money to the guys who are going to win, I guess it's fine. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your dollars. But if you're coming at us with wanting real fantasy advice and deciding how you want to try and win fantasy the most, do not base your decision on the guy that you think is just you want to cheer for. If for some reason the stars have aligned, they don't play in the AFC West, they have the same exact defenses, they have the same exact offenses, and you can't think of another thing in your mind, that they have the same injury history, they have a clone of the quarterback, this twin brother plays for the same team, everything is the same. If you want to pick the guy that plays for your team, go for it, but I'm just telling you, when you start to use your emotions, you make bad fantasy decisions. So try and do things in a logical, a couple of step process that you're ready to break ties for when you're making your decisions on fantasy. So when you're doing your top 150, when you're doing your tier lists, guys within tier lists, within specific tiers, make sure that you're using good tiebreakers to place those guys one under the other, and how you figure out where you want those guys to fall in the line. So
yeah. Now, let me ask you one more thing, that this is another comment or thing that people will sometimes use as tiebreakers. How do you feel about looking at players' bye weeks?
I'm a huge fan, and I think you are of this too. I think we've talked about this before. I'm a huge fan of, like, if I have a bunch of fucking 9-week buys, I'll just sacrifice week 9, right? Like, if it fits and it really does work out with my team, I'm okay with doing it. But I don't usually look at the bye weeks to make my decision on a player, especially within my tier lists. If the draft day comes and everything fits, which it won't, these tiebreakers are always going to tell you who the better player is to take overall. Then maybe I'll look at the bye week, but I don't even look at that, to be honest with you. I really don't.
I don't have it. I don't have the bye week written down anywhere, and I make it a point not to look at it, because one, it's like just extra information that I don't need.
Right.
I don't care if they all end up on the same week. Great, then I just forfeit that week. Yeah. That doesn't bother me. I'm going to go in the future.
I'm fine. Yeah, I'm totally.
I prefer that, but I'm not going to go out of my way to pick somebody who has the same bye week.
I'm not going to go the other way with it either. So, I will say one of the last things that I'm willing to break some tiebreakers for, and this sort of bleeds into our next topic, is certain players benefit from just being in a good system on their offense, or and this word gets thrown around a lot, right? Like, this guy is a system quarterback, blah 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 is a system quarterback, and that gets thrown around a lot. I think this is sort of different. It lends itself to the same sort of idea, but it's not exactly the same, right? System quarterbacks are talking about an offensive scheme that's maybe put in place that anybody can succeed in, and that's sort of what we're talking about here in fantasy. It's just more played out amongst the quarterbacks, right? So, for example, the Air Coryell system that they were running on offense last year in Arizona, Bruce Arians runs that offense. It is really good for running backs who can make one cut and just see you later, right? It's really good for running backs who are good at cutting, right? It's able to spread the line out, and you can make great cuts. It also runs a lot of play action, which DJ gets balls out of the backfield when he gets thrown to, and he also gets handoffs and can take it to the house. So it keeps defenses honest. It's a really great system. It lends itself to running backs that can make a cut and take it to the house. So like DJ was gonna be a star no matter what last year, as long as he didn't get hurt. The same thing with the Steelers running back system. It's a fast-paced offense, and they're another one where they run. I'm pretty sure that they run like a stretch zone, I think they call it. I'm pretty sure that the offensive coordinator at the Steelers calls it. And Le'Veon really benefits from that patience of waiting for a hole to open and then making a decision. Slow to, fast through, right? It's the old Edgerrin James, I think used to do that. Slow to the hole, fast through the hole, right? And he really benefits from that. And as long as a running back is basically capable in any way, they're gonna be successful in those types of running games, right? So another one is Kansas City. That's another good example. They just have a good place for running backs. So people who are in specific systems that really benefit them, I'm way more willing to pick that guy than I am to pick a guy who maybe is just a good player, but maybe not in the position that he's put in to thrive, right?
Yeah. So let me make one point, and then we'll transition into this a little bit more. This system thing, it does even more than break ties, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's how I pick players. I'm just saying that's also something that I use to break ties as well.
Yeah. But it like don't think that we're saying just because they're in a system that fits them that's only a tiebreaker. Like that can just move you up a tier or 3 tiers or down if you're in a system that doesn't fit you. So going on to that, who's in new systems that work better for them, or what players and what teams have improved or gotten worse in your mind?
That's a great point. I think I have a couple of people in mind that definitely fit this mold super well. One that I'm iffy about that I'm interested to hear your take on is Brandon Marshall. Brandon Marshall went from a place where he was getting a stupid amount of targets, but the targets were uncatchable, right? So even with a huge frame and an ability, God, he's so tough, right? He plays through anything. I mean, that guy plays through literally anything, but he can only do so much. The quarterback has to get it remotely within his grasp, right? So he's gone from the Jets over to the Giants this year. Big move, New York to New York, right? But his quarterback play has improved significantly, regardless, even in the past couple of teams that he's been on. Although Jay really loves to feed it to him. Jay loves to get it to Marshall, dude. So he goes and he's going to be the number 2 to Odell. He's not even going to face number 1 coverage this year unless there's a guy that strictly plays on the outside, because Odell usually plays in the slot. So Marshall's going to go to a place where this year he's going to be on the outside, and he should be able to win against number 2 coverage. I'm feeling pretty good about that guy, especially comparatively to last year. I don't think he's going to have like another 1,500-yard season, but I'm expecting, if he stays healthy in any way, even if he plays hurt, I'm expecting probably 70 to 90 balls out of him, 90 on the pretty high range, I think. I think Odell's going to chew up a lot of their yards. What do you think about that guy?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a different player than he's been. He's not going to be this high-volume, 170 target guy that he's been his whole career. Yeah. But on the flip side, for the first time in basically his entire career, as far as we can remember, since he's been fantasy relevant at least, he's going to be facing number 2 cornerbacks, or he's not going to be the focus of the defense. Every play, Odell will be the focus of the defense, on every single play.
Yeah, I think
in the red zone, Odell will be the focus of the defense, every play. And so Brandon Marshall is especially going to benefit in the red zone when people will be focused on Odell and maybe running the ball with their, junky running backs. And Marshall's going to be the second option basically for the defense, but he's going to get the ball. Like Eli had Plaxico Burress as his receiver once upon a time, and he just threw him the ball and got touchdowns.
Right.
Because you just throw it to the big guy, and he's going to outmuscle.
Yeah,
I think Marshall's going to get a lot. He's going to get a lot more of that than he's got recently. The Giants are going to score a lot more points than the Jets have been scoring. But you're right. I mean, I'm looking at not maybe 1,000 yards.
Right. I think that's the line I'm drawing in the sand for him, like 950. Right. I think he's going to be somewhere between 900 and 1,000. I'm drawing the line at 950, and let's call it a very realistic possibility that he gets in between 8 and 10 touchdowns. Right. The touchdown numbers are going to go up. He could score 14. It wouldn't surprise me, but I don't think it'll happen. But it wouldn't surprise me at all. Right. They've been throwing at the tight ends the last couple of years, and they've been trying to run it around the red zone, and they've just been blowing ass.
They have 3 slot receivers, right?
Yeah.
Like they had Victor Cruz, Odell Beckham, and Sterling Shepard. Those are all slot receivers.
Yeah.
They finally got a red zone target.
And they were all good slot receivers too. They're all like
fantastic slot receivers.
Fantastic slot receivers. Red zone, right? So when they get a guy who's 6'4", 6'5" in there, who also still has jumping ability and just plays tough as nails, I think he was a really good fit in the offseason. I'm not drafting him in like the 3rd or 4th round, but if he's coming back around me to, in deeper leagues, 5th and 6th round, and especially if he makes it anywhere past that, I'm very willing to jump on him, especially if I have safety in the rest of my draft, right?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of guy.
I don't think he's especially. I think he's kind of got a low ceiling, as far as he's not going to blow up for any more than 1,000 yards.
Right.
But I think he's got a pretty low floor.
I'm in his touchdowns really. I think he's more low floor than low ceiling, because
he's going to get like 50 yards a game for sure. He won't get too many games to 100 yards.
Yeah, I think his yardage is the biggest cap for him. Like he even could have more balls thrown his way, because if he needs to pick up an important 3rd down, he's your guy. He's good for that, right? So his catch may be 3rd down and 2 yards, but it was a huge catch and it was still a catch. Right, so his catches could be still somewhat relevant if you play in a PPR league. His yardage is going to take the biggest hit, but man, he could be just a touchdown monster this year, depending on how much Eli. You said it earlier. I think we've talked about this before. Eli has to be willing to chuck it to him. Right? Even if the play call isn't to Marshall, he has to be willing to bow out of that play and get it to the right guy. And Marshall is the right guy when you have a bunch of other slot receivers on the field.
Yeah, especially like if I have faith in Eli. He's not Peyton as far as changing the play goes.
No.
Peyton was better than anybody. But I have faith in him that if Brandon Marshall's lined up on the outside in the red zone and there's only one guy across from him, he's going to lob it up to him and let him get a touchdown.
I would hope so. So, all right, who's a guy that you're looking at that's had some changes, a change of scenery, but should still be solid this year, or better, way better this year?
Well, for talking about way better, I guess I would have to say that Marshawn Lynch is going to do a little bit better than he did last year.
All right, that's fair.
So,
all right, amongst people who played football last year, football last year.
But seriously, let's talk for a minute about Marshawn Lynch.
Okay, we can talk
because he did have a big change, and he went from 2 years ago in Seattle playing behind one of the worst offensive lines in the league. Last year, sitting on his couch eating Skittles. This year, playing behind the best offensive line in the league. So, what do you think about this guy?
I think I'm having a real Marshawn Lynch may be one of the biggest spots that I have, like, I'm being very oxymoronic about almost, because I have him pretty low in my tier list because I'm not that keen on a guy that's older now. He's coming off of a year on the sofa. That's not necessarily terrible for a running back, but I have my doubts, right? I have a reason to be doubtful. And I don't think they're overly committed to one player in Oakland either. Right? They ran they ran between 4 different guys last year, and Latavius was heavily the favorite, but they ran between 4 different guys last year, and especially when it came to passing the ball, Latavius was just never around, and I don't think Marshawn's going to be there in that capacity either, right? Couple that with the fact that I just think it's doubtful that he's going to play a whole lot of games. I'm not super high on him this year, but on the flip side, Latavius Murray is consistently or at least in Oakland especially, he's just the 15th best running back in fantasy, right? And that guy sucks. He really sucks. Like, he's not good. He just gets 400 touches a year, and he makes his way. Volume wins fantasy. It's not a joke. Like, it means it matters. So if Marshawn gets any sort of volume whatsoever, he's twice the player that Latavius Murray is, and ever will be, right? So if he just falls forward, he's got to be better. So especially behind one of the, it really is. It's one of the best lines in football, maybe the best. They're top 3 for sure, and they're probably first. So I have to imagine now. A point to bring up on this is the Seahawks a couple of years ago did have really good lines. They were some of the best lines in football. Tom Cable's really good line coach, and they lost a lot of players and traded some away. You know, various things happened. So he is used to running behind good lines. So maybe we can expect something good from Beast Mode. I'm just not like relying on him as a safe pick to try and win me my league. You know?
Yeah, I think when he plays, he's going to get you touchdowns because all the other guys in that backfield are little scat back guys. So he's gonna be the goal line guy. He's not gonna have any competition for that role. He's gonna get all their rushing touchdowns out of a good offense.
Right.
But I don't see any way he plays 16 games. I think it would be a miracle if he played 14.
Yeah, I have him somewhere pegged around, like, if he plays more than 10 games, I'll be really, or I'll be happy. If he plays more than 12, I'll be really ecstatic. Right? Like if he plays for the majority of my fantasy season, even if he pushes me to the playoffs and he's not there for the playoffs, I'll say you won on that draft pick. I'll say you did a pretty good job.
Yeah. So he's another one of these guys we were talking about earlier that's a pretty big injury risk because of his age and because the last time he played he was beat up the whole season.
Right. Yeah, he's definitely. I mean, he runs hard. You get beat up. It just happens. He's one of the running backs that I'll never project for 16 games. Even if he was 5 years younger and he had been healthy the previous 3 years, I'm not projecting him for 16 games. It's irresponsible. I just think it's a bad idea. So, aside from the funny Marshawn Lynch, do you have somebody else who you think had a change of scenery that you think is either better or worse?
Yeah, definitely. So, Terrell Pryor has really significantly improved his situation. He's no longer playing for the 1-15 Cleveland Browns, and he's moved to one of the better offenses in football.
Yeah.
And not only that, but an offense that desperately needs a red zone threat.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So I think that while they won't, a few things he did have going for him in Cleveland last year were that he was really the only person they could throw the ball to, and they were losing really badly in every game, so they just threw it every play.
They could do whatever they wanted every play, which was sort of nice.
Yeah, people weren't even playing against backups and things like that, but they still, despite that, they still didn't score a lot of points. They're gonna score a lot more points now as a team, the Redskins. So he's gonna be in the running for more touchdowns, and I mean everything about that is better than the Browns. Everything about his new situation. Like the Redskins' defense is still not good, so that's good. He's still in a bad defense situation, but their offense is just way better on every level.
Yeah, I think you slam dunked with the red zone targets this year. I think he's going to be a really surprise good player for standard leagues. I wonder how he's going to play in a timing-based offense. He didn't play in that last year. They just chucked it to him, and he was the biggest, fastest guy on the field. He's not blazing fast, but, I mean, he ran, like a 4.4 for a guy that's like 6'3 plus? I mean, he's fast. He's fast, dude. So, and he has really good hands. He's super athletic. We just have to remember to temper our expectations because this is a guy that's his second year of receiving. Even though he's been working on it for a little while, he's still getting better, which is almost scary in its own right in the other way, right? Like to think of what he could be. But we do need to temper expectations thinking this isn't a guy who just went to a better offense and is a super good receiver, right? So
yeah,
we need to be careful tempering our expectations that way and stuff. But yeah, I think he's in a much better situation overall to just improve. He's got to improve, and improving on a 1,000-yard season with 80 catches or 90 catches and not too many touchdowns. That's a guy that I'd like to have on my team. I think that's a guy I'm kind of targeting.
Yeah, let's be clear. We don't think he's going to get 1,600 yards and become Antonio Brown because of a better offense. Those things aren't going to happen. He'll probably get a few hundred more yards, maybe my guess is between 1,100 and 1,200, something in that range, and he's going to get several more touchdowns. Looking at close to 10 is my guess, 8 to 10.
I think 8 is a fair number. I think that he could get. He's like Brandon Marshall, right? He's the new fancy red zone target. I think he could be anything up to probably 14 or 15. Just depends on how much they're going to feed him the ball. I also think that Jordan Reed being in or out also plays. Yeah, I mean, and we joke about Jordan Reed and stuff, and it's unlikely that he plays for a majority of the season, but his being in or out depends on where Kirk Cousins throws the ball in the red zone.
Yep, absolutely.
So, a guy that I'm looking at this year that I think actually got worse. We were talking about some people that got better, but a guy that I think changed sceneries and got worse is Adrian Peterson, right?
Yeah.
We talk about guys that come into systems that make a lot of sense. I don't necessarily think that AP is a terrible fit for the Saints. I think that he offers some things that they need, but I think that the expectations need to be tempered because he is in the Saints offense, and this is one of the most notorious running back by committees, right? In the history of all football, this is the running back by committee, right? So
Sean Payton was doing running backs by committee before it was cool.
Right, that's exactly right. He is the running back by committee hipster, right? So when we're talking about Adrian Peterson, I think that a lot of people are super high on the fact that he's going to be another one of these, 250 plus carry guys, and he's going to break out for all these yards and all this. I'm not seeing it. What's your thoughts?
I don't see it. I mean, first of all, I think at least as someone who follows things pretty closely, it's kind of clear to me that Mark Ingram is the starting running back, at least to start the season.
I agree.
And like Sean Payton is going to be a little fickle, and not to say that Mark fumbles it once, that he'll get benched or something like that, which is what happened last year. He fumbled it basically one time. He just didn't see the field for like a game and a half. But I think Mark's the starting running back. I think he's going to get something like 15 touches a game. I think Adrian Peterson's going to get something like 10 touches a game, at least to start the season. And so I think that seriously capped his upside. I mean, he's not going to get 100 yards with 10 carries a game, at least not consistently. And in addition to that, as we talked about earlier, no kind of the player and the team situation, the Saints defense is not going to be good this year. No. They're probably not going to be average this year. They might be slightly below average. It would be good for them if they were slightly below average. It'd be a big improvement.
Yeah.
So Adrian Peterson is Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara are both better receivers than Adrian Peterson is.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a way to dispute that with their histories.
If the Saints are losing, AP is going to be off the field because they have two guys who are better than him at the pass blocking and receiving. In addition to that, as I joked about earlier, Mark Ingram getting benched for fumbling last year, he's fumbled like 5 times in his career. He like never fumbles basically. Adrian Peterson fumbles 5 times every season. You think like Sean Payton all of a sudden isn't going to stop getting mad about fumbles? So I think that it's as possible as it is that Adrian Peterson takes over the number 1 job from Mark Ingram at some season. At some part of the season. It's also possible that he gets a reduced role at some point if he starts fumbling again.
I don't know. I don't think that AP really has a fumbling problem. I wouldn't call it a fumbling problem. You got to remember, a lot of it comes from the fact of the way he runs and how many carries he gets, right? So the guy who gets an insane amount of carries and always runs it up the gut where people are ripping and punching at the ball versus somebody who gets swing passes half the time and just runs out of bounds or only runs through gaping holes, right?
Yeah.
So you have to remember that it's a little bit more realistic to think that the guy who gets all the much higher volume is going to probably have more fumbles. I think it's a valid concern. I think that I think one of the biggest things that's going to decide this job is pass protection, which I actually think that they're both fine at. I don't think that anybody's like really winning or losing here, but Drew is the reason that the offense runs the way that it does, and I think whoever is able to protect and give the most versatility is the one who's going to win the job. But to me, it's just so clear that Mark is the first guy there, at least for now, right? So people need to be really careful about drafting AP, especially before Mark, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Don't reach on the guy, and then at least take the starting running back in the system. I mean, if you are going to take the RBBC guy, running back by committee guy, take the guy who starts, right? Take the guy who's liable to get 15 touches rather than the guy who's liable to get 8 to 10 touches.
Yeah, and additionally, another thing against both Adrian Peterson and Mark Ingram is that Sean Payton is notoriously fickle with his running backs.
Yeah,
and so even if at some point AP does become the quote starter,
right,
he could get 2 carries, miss a blocking assignment, and then not play the rest of the game.
Absolutely.
This happens as anybody who's owned Mark Ingram in the past knows this.
Right.
This happens to Mark Ingram all the time. There's at least one game a season where he plays 3 plays, does something dumb, and doesn't see the field again.
Sometimes they don't even have to do something.
Mad.
Sometimes they don't even have to do something dumb, right? He just decides that this is the series for this guy, and that's the series that the running back gets really quality runs. It happens. It happened to Tim Hightower last year in 2 games. Forget the games that Mark was benched for him. It happened to Tim Hightower in 2 different games where he just got series that were very productive. That's just how it goes. So you got to be careful with that, and especially I don't really condone drafting those guys at all in like really high draft spots, but definitely draft a guy that is at least the starter, right? So do you have any other guys that you wanted to talk about, or do we want to talk about major personnel changes and coaching changes?
I think we should move on to, in addition to some players like the ones we just mentioned, Brandon Marshall, Terrell Pryor, Marshawn Lynch, Adrian Peterson, moving teams and either improving or worsening their situation. There's also been quite a few either major coaches or quarterbacks have a bigger effect when they move teams that have moved and really impacted the entire team and the entire scheme about that. So maybe we should get started talking about the one that I know is your personal favorite offensive coordinator in all of fantasy football. Kyle Shanahan has moved to the San Francisco 49ers. What do you think about that? How does he impact the 49ers offense?
I think we should be, I think we could touch pretty briefly on all of these personnel changes because we're going to get to the players that they impact in future weeks and where we think that those players are value-wise. But I think there's definitely a couple of people that we need to go over. And Shanahan, he's top 5 fantasy offensive coordinator for me at least, right? Because I know what I'm getting out of the guy. I know that his running backs, at least one of them, probably 2 of them, are going to be very fantasy viable, especially if you play in points per reception leagues. And his ex-receiver, who this year will be Pierre Garçon, in the past has been guys like Julio Jones last year, has been Pierre Garçon previously, has been DeAndre Hopkins before. I mean, this guy, it's no coincidence, right, that he's made stars and also the players that are producing these things are also good. He finds a way to make his players good, puts his players in position to make big. I mean, this is the guy that got 1,300 yards out of Steve Slayton. Come on, dude. Like, the running backs for San Francisco this year will be good. His ex-receiver will be good. He's a good offensive coordinator in terms of fantasy.
Yeah, totally agree. There's not much else to say about it. I mean, his ex-receiver and his running back they're both going to break 1,000 yards easy. The ex-receiver is going to get 170 targets probably. Yeah. And one thing I know a lot of people are skittish about Brian Hoyer. Brian Hoyer threw 1,500 yards to DeAndre Hopkins. Okay, yeah. Brock threw like 900. Right. So Brian Hoyer can support a number 1 receiver.
Absolutely.
Don't worry about it.
At least a receiver he can support in Kyle Shanahan's system. He's done it before.
Not saying you should go start drafting Brian Hoyer.
Right.
But
right.
Don't be afraid to draft the people that you support.
That's exactly right. I would say the second person that we want to talk about is good old Smokin' Jay in Miami.
Smokin' Jay
Cutler in Miami. So how does this change the overall Miami offense in general?
Well, from a quarterback position, it's kind of totally different. I mean, Ryan Tannehill's a young guy. He's tends to actually be a little bit more conservative. That's why Jarvis Landry gets so many catches for 4 yards. Right, he tends to check down a lot. Smokin' Jay Cutler doesn't check down. He throws that thing in a triple coverage.
That guy hasn't checked down since now.
He's never. Jay Cutler's never seen a 6'4" receiver in triple coverage didn't like. Yeah. Right, he spent years throwing in triple coverage to Alshon Jeffrey and especially Brandon Marshall. He's not gonna stop now. So
he's not.
Two really big things that this means for Miami's offense. One, I think it means that Jarvis Landry is going to take a little bit of a hit.
A little? Yeah, I think so.
Like, the guy already didn't score touchdowns. He's a PPR machine. And I think Jay's just going to throw it to him less. Jay likes throwing it to big guys on the outside. Miami doesn't have any proven big guys. Probably Devontae Parker's like the guy people have been talking about is going to break out for 2 or 3 years in a row now. I think if he's ever going to do it, this is the year, because if you're a big guy and you're decent, Jay's going to funnel you the ball.
I'm putting everyone on notice right now. Jay's number one receiver every single year, if he's 6'2" and above, he gets like fucking 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns. It is foretold in the prophecy, okay? If Devontae Parker does not, if he's healthy this year and he doesn't do it this year, it's not happening. I'm telling you right now, it's not happening. Jay Cutler will force feed the guy the ball. I have to. He's never given me any reason to believe otherwise. And don't not draft Jarvis Landry in the future because of this. You know what I'm saying? I mean, this is going to be an anomaly year. Once he gets back to a guy that runs more in a check down offense, timing based, that sort of stuff, is fine with throwing underneath routes all the time. Jarvis Landry is going to be a machine again. But for this year, you got to move him down a couple of tiers, and you got to move Devontae Parker up a couple of tiers. And don't draft Smoking Jay. Please don't draft Smoking Jay.
Please do not draft Jay Cutler. He got off his couch last week for the first time in he's been literally watching tape, practicing, talking about football for the last 6 months. He hasn't thrown a football.
Right.
He's been sitting on his couch.
Yeah. All right.
Don't pick him.
So from the guy who's used to throwing in this to triple coverage to the possibly other end of the spectrum by the most conservative shit of all time, Tom Coughlin is now at the Jacksonville Jaguars, and we have a quote from Doug Marrone that is literally hilarious. What do you think is going to wind up being the mantra at the Jaguars this year?
When asked by a reporter last week how many times he wanted Blake Bortles to throw the ball during a game on average, he said 0. None. Want to run the ball every single play. Now, not only does that suggest that you should not draft Blake Bortles, and that Blake Bortles might not be long for the world in Jacksonville, but it also means that you should pick Jacksonville's running back, which, as of right now, as long as his foot is feeling better, is Leonard Fournette. And again, it's not that we think Jacksonville's offensive line suddenly got great and he's going to start, getting 8 yards a carry or anything like that. But as we've been talking about all day, volume is going to win you games in fantasy. This guy's going to get it, right, Mike?
I mean, I can't imagine that there's a way that Jacksonville doesn't try and run 30 times a game. You want to take the ball out of Blake Bortles' hands as much as possible, and you want to. I mean, I'm serious. I know that we laugh about it, but they're trying to win football games. They're trying to do everything that they can to sell tickets. I think that they're going to try and take the ball out of Blake Bortles' hands as much as possible, and just run it as much as they can. I wouldn't even be really upset taking a Jacksonville backup this year in a super deep league where maybe the league is the rosters are locked. I wouldn't be completely opposed. You could pick worse backups than that. And he may get hurt. He's been hurt before at LSU, and now he's got an injury. He's got a foot injury here. So, and he's a rookie. He's just a rookie. I mean, not all rookies are Zeke, right? We got spoiled last year. So, I would definitely think that there's going to be a huge importance on running the football this year. Who else likes to run the football, Joe?
Well, I don't know who others like to run the football.
All right, well, Hugh Jackson and Kubiak likes to run the football. But what I was alluding to is Kubiak leaving the Broncos this year, right? And Vance Joseph taking over.
Oh, yeah.
How is that going to affect the Broncos this year?
Well, over his career, Gary Kubiak, he runs the same, I guess, an older, an unmodernized version of Kyle Shanahan's offense, which is a lot of zone runs, a lot of play actions to the X receiver. And what that does is a few things. It takes a lot of pressure off the quarterback. So probably Trevor Siemian although it was his first year starting, he probably looked better than he should have looked. Or his stats at least looked, but he didn't look any good. But the stats looked pretty good at the end of the day because of Kubiak's system. So I think he'll fall off statistically a little bit. He might look better because he's just not a rookie 7th-round pick anymore, or a first-year player. But the other thing that's going to happen is that offensive line was bad, and they didn't run the ball that well. They're going to run it worse this year.
I can't imagine that they don't, right? Like, if you were thinking about picking C.J. Anderson, don't.
The guy's always hurt, and he wasn't able to run with Gary Kubiak, who, he took fullbacks in Denver, I think, with Tatum Bell or something, some guy that nobody ever heard of, Sean Drone. He was picking fullbacks up off the street and getting 1,000 yards with them. Right. And C.J. Anderson can't get 1,000 yards with that guy?
Right.
Give me a break.
Right. So I think that's a big one. And then another guy that was leaving as well is Brock out of Houston, dude.
Oh, man. The people are free. They're liberated. The receivers in Houston are liberated.
The people are free. Dude, it wasn't only receivers last year. He found a way to cuck Lamar Miller too, because everybody knew that they weren't that Brock, even if the wide receivers were open, he was going to throw it in the dirt 4 feet away from him. Like, that's pathetic, dude. There's just
those guys didn't have a chance.
Yeah, they were not given any sort of chance. I actually considered DeAndre Hopkins actually Superman for getting 900 yards last year. That's a goddamn miracle, right? That's just a Christmas miracle right there. He's literally Superman, and Brock is his kryptonite, and even that couldn't take him all the way down. I'm going to have a field day with Houston players this year, whether Tom Savage or Deshaun Watson starts. I think it's pretty possible that Watson starts later in the year. Depends on, as you said, how much of a dick Bill O'Brien decides to be. But I don't think it matters who starts, really. I think that I'm going to have a field day with Houston players, and they're probably going to be very close to back to what they were just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think they will be closer to what they were a couple of years ago. I'm not going to prop DeAndre Hopkins getting 1,500 yards again, but he's not going to get 900 yards either. But he's going to be like 12, 1,300 maybe. Like he's got the upside to be a top 5 receiver.
Right. I think it's also something to be noted is that statistically last year was just an anomaly for receivers, right? Last year receivers were just down, and then the year before they were astronomically high. You should aim that your receivers are going to settle somewhere in between this coming year, right? Things don't just keep repeating themselves over and over again, all kind of statistical anomalies. So I think it's going to settle somewhere in the middle. So, yeah, you're right. Hop may not have 1,500 yards, but I think anywhere in between 1,100 and 1,400 is extremely plausible, right? So I think it's just fantastic news that Brock is out of Houston. I also don't think he's going to start in Cleveland, but that's another argument for another day, maybe. All right, so we're going to wrap up the stream in just a couple of minutes here. Let's talk about, we're just heading into preseason week 2, right? After seeing some of the games of preseason week 1, we told you guys what we were looking for last time. If you didn't watch episode 1, go catch it. It's on our channel. I'll make sure that I link it in the description here. And also in our Discord, I'll link the Discord invitation as well. What are you looking for in preseason week 2, Joe, and what's most important to you moving forward?
Well, one of the main things that we're really hoping to see the rest of the preseason, but especially kind of this week and next week, is who are the backup running backs, right? Who are the starting running backs in places where there's running backs by committee, and who are the backup running backs?
Yeah.
Because we want to know who we're going to draft in these later rounds, that or also in situations like Zeke and Tampa Bay where people are suspended, who's going to play those first few weeks, and who should we be looking to draft out of those teams?
Yeah, 100%. I want to see who rolls out with the ones, right? And I want to see how much playing time they get, because the less, the better. Still, even in preseason week 2, this isn't the game that we're really looking for people to play even a full quarter. I want to see who plays the least. Those guys are the ones. 100% you're going to see those guys be the starters on day 1. You'll also get to see more playing time from the offensive lines this week. So that should be something that you're keying in on, see how those guys play. They still block the same for running back 1, running back 2, running back 14, right? I want to see how those guys play. And speaking of an offensive line battle, this is something that we are so excited for, because I believe it's going to be putrid.
It's beautiful. It's tomorrow night too. It's Thursday game, so it should be, everybody should have time to see it.
Guys, pay attention to this. The Cincinnati Bengals are playing the Houston Texans. As far as I know, Joe, do you know if anybody's hurt? I'm pretty sure everyone's playing for the Texans in their front 7. Even Brian Cushing. That's a miracle.
Yeah, I think that whole front 7 should, as far as I know, should be playing at least the first series or 2.
Yeah, so at least for the first 2 series, I expect the Houston Texans to take the Cincinnati Bengals line out back and just old yelling it. Like, it's gonna be rough, and if that really needs to be paid attention to. The offensive line for the Bengals really, really got much worse this season, and I think that the Texans are a great opportunity for them to prove me wrong. I want them to prove me wrong this year. I want more fantasy relevant players. Okay. And I'm looking for that battle tomorrow, and to see potentially what their running backs can do behind that line. So I think that that's a pretty big one. You got anything else you're looking for? Oh, I know a player that you really want to see play.
And there's one guy I wanted to see him last week.
Yep.
He didn't play last week. I want to see Cam Newton play.
Yep.
There's two big reasons I want to see Cam Newton play. One is that he's coming off of a shoulder surgery. He's got a bump shoulder. So I want to see, like, does he look comfortable throwing the ball? Can he throw it far or at least hard, depending on what routes people are running and things like that. I don't really care to see him run. I doubt he's going to run in the preseason. I'm not interested. The guy can run.
Yeah.
The guy can run. I'm not worried about him running. Like, he could, if his shoulder hurts, he can go play running back. He'll be great. Right? Not worried about him running. I want to see him throw the ball, and I want to see him throw the ball in this new offense that they're supposed to be doing. They drafted Christian McCaffrey and Curtis Samuel, two guys who are either scat backs or slot guys, depending on the play, really. And those guys don't fit Cam's strengths at all. Cam's strengths is like 7 or 9 step drop, let the receivers get deep down the field, fire it in there faster than anybody else in the league. But his accuracy is kind of, especially on short passes, has kind of been in question his whole career. And the check down stuff where they're getting to his 4th or 5th read isn't really his thing.
Yeah,
he's not really shown a lot of capability to do that.
The guy's incredible. The guy's incredible at throwing 70 yards off his back foot with a flick of the wrist, but he's not too great at tossing it over the middle or leading his running back in screens and wheel routes and stuff like that. So I'm looking to see how that. The thing for me is with Cam Newton, the offense is so much different with him in versus with him out. Right, that to me is part of why I want to see Cam Newton in the game, because I can't replicate Cam Newton. Joe Webb sucks, right? Joe Webb is not. I know he runs, but he doesn't do the same thing that Cam Newton does. Cam Newton's a special player. Joe Webb is not a special player, right? So we know that he's not gonna. We know that Christian McCaffrey's here now. He's not all of a sudden not gonna be the starter just because he's not great at throwing touch passes. They're gonna need to work it out. I want to see if they can work it out in the first couple of weeks of the preseason. So I'm super stoked to see that. I really hope that he plays as well. If he doesn't, I'll be super tuned into their game on preseason week. Like super, yeah. I will be, if I have to pick one game for the entire slate to watch, that's probably the one that I'll watch right there, because I don't know about any other starters that I'm maybe that keened into. I don't think Luck's going to play throughout the preseason, so I think I'm probably tuned into that one more than anything else. Yeah.
Let's close with this. One thing we're not watching for. We're not watching for what people like training camp prodigies do in the 3rd or 4th quarter against backups.
Yeah, geez.
You know, it's great that Kenny Golladay got 3 touchdowns last week against the backups for people who won't make the team he was playing against. I don't care. Don't care one single bit. Still not drafting that guy.
The only caveat I'll say to that, and this isn't necessarily completely fantasy related, but it could be later on in the season. It's just something to watch for. This is where I stress the importance of watching games. I just think watching games for your fantasy career is incredibly important. Joe and I watch all the games. We do this so that you guys don't have to, okay? But I think it always helps to watch the games. Watching quarterbacks make throws against uncontested and contested defenses, whether they're against first stringers or fourth stringers, watching if the guy can make the throw, right? That's important. Watching a running back make a cut can be sometimes just as impressive, whether it's a first rounder or a fourth rounder. Watching people and using your eyes and deciding, hey, does this wide receiver run good routes? Right? That can be important, and it can translate later on into the season. But yeah, I'm not looking for the guy who blows up 4 touchdowns against fourth stringers. Like, you can't just take a stat line and attribute it to saying this guy's going to be really good. You need to watch the game. You need to decide what he's doing, and you need to put it into context. So that's super important. And I can tell you, I'm stoked for preseason week 2. You got anything else you're looking out for?
That's it.
Good deal.
Don't be a preseason stat watcher.
Yeah, exactly. Please do not be a preseason stat watcher, guys.
Don't even look at the box scores.
Yeah, don't forget the box scores. The box scores are bad in regular season. They're a billion times worse in preseason. I want to see who's getting the volume. I want to see who they're putting out there. I want to see how guys are playing and what they're doing in context of the game. And I want to see them. I want to see them improving themselves, not necessarily just taking advantage, right, of third and fourth stringers. So, that's all we're going to hit for this week's, guys. Next week, we're going to start talking about more content. We're going to start talking about specific players that we're looking forward to. We're going to talk about where we think we should be drafting players. We got a whole lot of great content coming for you guys. We're going to try and make sure that we get you guys squared away for your drafts. We know that drafts are happening. We're in a couple right now. We're in a slow draft, and we got a couple of drafts coming up this weekend. hang tight, make your tier list, massage them every day. Don't forget to massage your tier list. And if you do that and you stay true to what you prepare with, you can't go wrong. Okay. So that's the advice that we have for you. Until next week, we'll catch you later. Joe, we're out, buddy.
Stay classy.